Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. Welcome to our winter semester, winter 2024. Good to have you here. Well, it's good. So first I would like to thank the sponsors for today's class. Jeff and Lori Goldschin are sponsoring in honor of the first class of the winter semester. Thank you very, very much. Aliza George is sponsoring in honor of her mother's yard site, Rachel, Basrina, and Mordechai. Her neshama should have an aliyah. And Michael and Adasa May, that's sponsoring in honor of Israel. It should be a swift victory, and we should get the hostages back home today. Amen. Amen. So, for our winter semester, we're going to be focusing on the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 13, verses 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'll read to you. You don't need the copy text in front of you, and those out there in Zoom land, don't worry about not having the text. I'll just read to you the verses that we're going to be studying about in this semester. It reads as follows. If there will arise among you a prophet or a dreamer of a dream, and he gives you a sign or a wonder. And the sign or the wonder of which he spoke to you happens, and he says, let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let's worship them. Let me set the scene for you. This fellow comes along. He says he's a prophet. And he performs miracles in front of you. He wows you. He abracadabras you, but he does things. He does signs and he does wonders. And let's say it's not Copperfield doing a show. Let's suppose he's actually performing magical tricks in front of you. He's doing miracles or wonders before you. And he does them. And then he says, now follow me, because we're going to worship other gods now. You shall not heed the words of that prophet or that dreamer of a dream. Just because someone performs magic before you, someone does wonders before you, doesn't make them a real prophet. If they say, come let us worship other gods, you should not follow them. For the Lord God is testing you to know whether you really love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall follow the Lord your God, fear him, keep his commandments, heed his verse, worship him, and cleave to him. And so we're going to study in this semester, what's a prophet? What is a prophet? See, as we've been discussing the entire fall semester, the Torah is this work of perfection. It's not a man-made book. It's not a written book by some great author. It's a godly authored book. And that's why, if we remember, we focused on it has to stay in its original text. That's what the focus of the fall semester was, that verse 1 of chapter 13. Don't add to it. Don't subtract it. Keep it in its perfection. However, the transmission of the law, now that we have this text, this Bible, the 5 books of Moses, and we pass it on carefully, every word as chapter 13 instructed us, don't add to it, don't subtract it, we're passing it on. We still need help with interpretation, with understanding. For that we need leadership. We need scholars, we need teachers, we need people to define for us meaning of this holy book. You see, we saw when we studied the book of Genesis that first 20 generations we went from Adam to Abraham. And in that period of time there was no human leadership. When there was no human leadership, the world turned to corruption and to evil rather quickly. We had the generation of the flood during the times of Noah. We had the generation of the Tower of Babylon during 10 generations later. Rak, ra, kol hayom is how the Torah describes the people. All they were doing was looking to perform evil. They're just left to their evil inclination. Free choice, left alone, left without direction, left without inspiration, leads to evil. Along comes an Abraham. Now there will be a family and later a nation that will be given the task of the responsibility to keep the world in line, to keep focus on goodness, to give goodness a chance, and thus the chosen people. We went through Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah and Rachel. We went through the 12 tribes. We went through the story of Joseph. We went through the Egyptian slavery. We went through the redemption. Then we went through the Sinai revelation, the giving of the Torah. Now, and we've gone through 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, and we're about to enter into the promised land. We now have a nation that is committed. This nation has a manual book, a guidebook, the Torah given to them by God as to how to keep the world in check, that the world will utilize its free choice for goodness. Perfection, we're never going to get a world of perfection, not until the Messiah comes. But at least to have that goodness has a chance in this world, the mission of the chosen people is to be that light unto the nations. But how do we know, post-Moses, who speaks in the name of God and who does not? How do we know who is the representative of God, the Moses of the generation, and who's a fraud? The danger of the fraud, the danger of the false prophet, is a threat to the entire eternal mission. Understand, if someone takes the Jewish people on a detour and takes us into a place we should not go, to follow gods of others that we should not follow, we lose this mission, and the mission must be eternal. So this is a critical part of the whole history of Judaism, of how we got from Sinai to here to today. We need to understand what is a prophet, why the need for prophets, perhaps more importantly, what is a false prophet, what to stay away from, what are these signs and wonders that are mentioned in the text that I quoted to you, and what does it mean that God is testing you? What exactly does that mean? I give that all to you just to whet your appetite to come back next week, because we're not going to be talking about that this week. That's what we will be talking about throughout our winter semester. But being that we haven't been together in a number of weeks, I do want to talk to you about Israel today. A quick announcement that I forgot to mention. You have flyers in front of you. We have a great lecture coming up on Monday, February 12th on the subject of Masada. Professor Jody Magnus is one of the leading archaeologists in the world today, and she's going to talk about Masada from Jewish revolt to modern myth. Make your reservations in advance. It's not on Zoom. Sorry, people out there. It's only live and in person. She's an author of a book on the same subject, Monday, February 12th. There was a group of monks. They were in a monastery and they took a vow of silence. The rule in this monastery was that once a year, only one monk would be allowed to stand up and make a statement for the entire group. One monk, one statement, once a year. The designated of the year came, everyone assembles together, a monk was selected, and he gets up and he says the following: you know, I really wish that we can have seeds in the rye bread. There was your statement for the year. A year goes by. The appointed day comes. Another monk is selected, and the other monk gets up and says, I prefer rye bread without seeds. Third year, third monk gets up and says, I can't stand this constant bickering, and sits down. I think we're all pretty much aware of the discourse, how it has developed in our country over the last few years. The manner and the tone in which people disagree with one another these days, it's different than when I was growing up. It has changed. There are always different parties. But today, it's become toxic, the discussion amongst us, if you belong to this party or that party, and more serious, which candidate you support, sometimes just mentioning the name of the candidate, and suddenly the conversation turns sour. How many friendships have been broken over the last few years simply because the discussion has gotten political? Now, the media loves this, and the politicians love this, because they have a vested interest in ratcheting things up and keeping it hot and hostile. Because news sells. So when there's hostility and there's anger, that's good for the news. And it gets votes if you get up and you slam the other candidates with full force. I mean, I was always a political junkie. I think the line in the debate that Benson said to Quayle was a zinger, but it wasn't hateful. Some of you know what I'm talking about. You're no Jack Kennedy, right? It was a great debate line. It was said with a smile. They were friends. It wasn't hostility. It's different today. And we're heading into now an election season, and I'm afraid we can expect to see people get more emotionally invested in their positions and more exasperated by those who have different positions, especially when it's your family members and friends. For some reason, you can't tolerate that someone within your own family may think differently than you. It's tragic enough when it's happening in this country, but perhaps far more tragic for us when we saw it taking place in Israel for the months leading up to the war pre-October 7th. I want to refresh our memories here. Let's rewind the clock just prior to the war. The new coalition government proposed reforms to the judicial system, and all heck broke loose. By many accounts, the sky was about to fall. Existence was coming to an end because of this one bill. Both sides sharpened their rhetorical knives, and the venom and the hostility in the media and on some of the streets in some of the cities of Israel was so over the top, threatening to divide this new country. And it's a relatively new country. It's a young country, like never before since 1948. You remember there were massive protests taking place throughout the country. Both sides, by the way, claimed to be the only true Zionists, the only true patriots, the only ones that really love Israel. And suddenly everything came down to this one issue. Are you ba'ad? Are you in favor? Or are you neged? Are you against it? There was no discussion other than that. Ba'ad or neged? You're for it or you're against it? In favor of judicial reform, opposed to judicial reform. There was no middle. There was no debate. It was just you were for it or against it. You are on one side or another side. And it became the defining issue of your identity. And it pitted group against group. It was right against left, religious against secular, this group against this group. Everyone just had an opinion. If you remember, we spoke about this pre-October 7th, and we spoke about how the term that was being used, and we heard it in the media here, made front page news in some of our American newspapers, that Israel was on the verge of a civil war. Now, I told you then it will never be a civil war, and I told you then that I was there. I visited a few times during this debate, and yes, you felt the debate in the air, but not to the point of a civil war. But the mere fact that those words could be used about Jew versus Jew over a political debate. We were talking about a civil war amongst us, that the newspapers were filled discussing this oncoming civil war because of a political debate. There were these three Schmendricks. Anyone have a good translation?
Not as bad as the Shomil.
Schmendricks are, they're dimwits, okay? Dimwits, but Schmendrick is a better word. Okay, so we're going to stay with Schmendricks. They were walking alongside the countryside on the outskirts of town, and they spotted a set of tracks. They see a set of tracks. So Schmendrick number one, the first Schmendrick says, "Look, deer tracks." To which Schmendrick number two says, "No, those are not deer tracks. They're dog tracks. So the third Shmendrik says to the other two, you're both crazy. Those are cow tracks. And they were still arguing and fighting about it when the train hit them. It's a cute story, right? The train hit us so hard on October 7th. Deer tracks, dog tracks, cow tracks. We were so busy arguing, and we didn't see the train coming right at us. This year marked 50 years of the Yom Kippur War. And 50 years later, literally almost to the day, and I believe on the secular calendar, it was exactly to the day, we were back at war again. 50 years. And we're there again. We have to remember that Israel is a tiny country. And it's surrounded by enemies that are bent and destroying her. Not just surrounded, but internally as well, the enemies are there. And what were we busy doing months leading up to this war? Judicial reform. That's what our focus was. That's what we were arguing about. That's where we invested our passions. Judicial reform. Conflicts amongst ourselves. You would wonder, have we not learned anything over the 2,000 years of exile? Look, it's perfectly normal and it's totally acceptable for human beings to have different opinions. Disagreement can be healthy, disagreement can be a productive thing, but there have to be some ground rules to keep it real, to keep it a discussion, to keep it a debate, even a hot political debate, but that's what it is.
GPS signal lost.
You have to stick to the substance of the issue. Don't exploit the argument, don't exploit the controversy for ulterior motives. Now you can get at the prime minister, now you can get at this party, now you can get at them, and you use a particular bill to push your agenda and escalate the agenda and get the media to escalate the agenda, and it becomes this firestorm. The most important ground rule for us as Jews is that we have to remember that as heated as any debate can get, we can't lose sight of who we are and what we are to each other. If you live in a place and you're surrounded by enemies, you in the middle, you gotta be close to one another. You have to have each other's back. You can argue, you can debate, but love each other because you need each other to survive. The enemies, they saw what was happening internally to us. And they took advantage of us staring and arguing about the cow tracks and deer tracks and dog tracks when the train hit us. A few months ago, in the midst of all this judicial reform chaos, there was this short video that went viral, and you may have seen it. It had this young man, he was standing outside a shopping mall. He's in Israel. He's holding the small Israeli flag. And as people go by, and it's being videotaped, he goes over to each person, it's all in Hebrew, and he says, "Excuse me, I have a question for you." The person says yes, and the person doing the interview says, "Are you for it or against it?" You didn't have to say for or against what. You knew what he was talking about. You're for it or against it. Now, if the person that he was asking outside the shopping mall said, "Ani ba'ad," I'm for it, he said, "Ani neged," I'm against it. If they said, "Ani neged," I'm against it, guess what he said? I'm for it. No matter what, he waited for the response and he took the opposite opinion. And then he would say, right after he let this individual know that he opposed this person on this political debate, he said this, Efsher chibuk? Can I get a hug? A hug. And every single Israeli, without exception, said, Betach, of course, and hugged him. And then he gave them a package of chocolate and a bottle of wine. And he said, the nation must remain united. This is what he did every single day for days, until he packaged it all together and he put it out there. And in this simple clip, he put before the Jewish people, hey, folks, we're one. Does it really matter? Enjoy the chocolate, enjoy the wine, and hug each other. Because we're one. We're one people. In this video, one after another, they either asked for a second hug, especially when they got the wine and the chocolate, or they started crying. Because they realized how powerful the simple message was. This fellow was so spot on. It's okay for us to have different opinions. We can agree to disagree, and we can still love each other. We can disagree without being disagreeable, without being nasty, without being mean-spirited. I'm not going to, but if we turn this into a discussion on judicial reform right now, we can have differences of opinions in this room and still be friends. The Baal Shem Tov would always say that loving God and loving a fellow Jew is a package deal. They come together. Banim atem la Hashem Elokeichem, you're children to God, your God. And as children of God, God wants to see his children getting along. Every one of us. Nothing makes our Father in heaven happier than seeing us get along, than helping one another, being kind to one another, being considerate to one another. You may be familiar with this if you pray the Amidah. Right at the end of the Amidah, what do? We take 3 steps back, and then we have this prayer for peace. We say, Oseh Shalom b'mramav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu. We take 3 steps back. Why do we do that? Because we cannot pray for peace, we cannot have peace, if we're not willing to step back a little and make room for others, for their opinions, for their personalities. So before I say anything about peace, I step back. Now there's room for others. Now we can talk about peace. And after we step back and we say this prayer, Oseh Shalom b'mramav, God, please bring peace. You know it from the famous song, right? Oseh Shalom b'mramav. That's the prayer we say in the end of the Amidah. We do something with our heads. Have you ever seen this? Where we move our heads to the right and our heads to the left. Have you seen anyone do that? There's a movement of the head as we say the prayer for peace. The point being that achieving peace and harmony often means nodding respectfully to those on the right of you and those on the left of you. There has to be a respect for others, for other opinions. It doesn't mean you're forced to agree with them. But you want to have peace, you want to have a peaceful environment, learn how to debate peacefully. A man went to see his doctor. He told his doctor, I don't know what to do. Every day, my wife has these outbursts. She gets angry at me. She completely loses it. And there's no calming her down no matter what I say. It just gets her angrier and angrier. I can't live this way. So the doctor says, I have a cure for that. You do? Yes. In fact, I don't even have to write you a prescription. I can just tell you what to do. You don't need to go to the drugstore. This is what you do. I want you to take a glass of water. I want you to put some sugar in the water. Mix it up real good. Have it in the room. And the next time your wife starts getting angry, go over to the glass. Drink a mouthful of this sugar water. But listen, you have to swish it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Don't swallow it. Just keep swishing until she calms down. And then you could swallow it. 2 weeks later, the guy comes back to the doctor. That's the doctor. That's okay. The guy's looking like a new man. He says, Doc, it works. It was just this brilliant remedy. Every time my wife started losing it, I take the glass of water, put it in my mouth, swish, back and forth, back and forth, back, and ultimately she calms down and I swallow it. It works every time. How did you find this? How does it work? I don't understand. The doctor says, the water itself did nothing. It's keeping your mouth shut that did the trick. So sometimes it's not what you say that's going to resolve anything, but simply that the person you care about knows that they're being heard, that their opinion matters. So sometimes you just stay quiet and you listen. You listen with your mind, you listen with your heart, and then if you'd like to speak, you can speak. Listening to another person's distress, their arguments, their complaints is one of the greatest acts of kindness we can do for them. Because when we listen to another person, we're telling them that you matter to me, that your opinion matters, that your intellect matters. But when you dismiss it right away with a hand, with a nose, you make like that. How could you think that way? What have you done? It's no longer about the political debate you were having. Now it became personal. The Lubavitcher Rebbe would constantly remind us that Jewish people are a single person with many millions of faces. We're really a single soul breathing within a multitude of diverse bodies. So in some way in each of us is found all the others. And whatever one does affects the rest. So if one of us falls, we all stumble. And when one of us does a mitzvah, we all participate. And if one is suffering, all of us share that pain. And when one rejoices, we all dance. When one sings, we all sing along. None of us can say to the other, you go your way, I will go mine. Because wherever you go, you take me with you. And wherever I go, I schlep you along. So whether we like it or not, our lots and our destinies are intertwined. We are stuck with each other. So we might as well learn to accept each other, get along with each other, and indeed love each other as the children of the same parents that we are. There was this article that appeared in some magazine. It was written by Elizabeth Gilbert. She told of a personal story, and she told it so well, I want to tell it over to you. She said she was on a city bus in Manhattan. It was slowly making its way across town at the height of rush hour. It's the end of the day. Anyone know what rush hour in Manhattan feels like? It's not pleasant. To make it worse, it was a very wet, cold night. It was pouring rain, and it was cold, and it was rush hour. It's the pits. And she's on the city bus. And if you've been on a city bus, there's not enough seats for everybody. Most people are standing on top of each other, trying to balance as the bus starts and goes and starts and goes. The traffic was barely moving. The bus was filled with cold people, wet people, tired people, anxious people, people that were very irritated, and they were getting on each other's nerves. The bus driver is hearing the arguments already. Hey, when you passed by, you bumped me. I didn't bump you. There was no place for me to move as you passed by. You shouldn't have passed by. Where else was I supposed to go? And he's just listening to this, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, and his bus is not moving. And he's hearing the shouting matches getting worse. The bus approaches 7th Avenue. The driver is sensing the tension, and he gets on the intercom. And this is what he says. Folks, I know you've all had a rough day. And I know you're all frustrated. I can't do anything about the weather, and I can't do anything about the traffic. But this is what I can do. As each of you gets off the bus today, I'm going to reach out my hand to you. And as you walk by, I want you to take all your troubles, put it in the palm of your hand, and drop it in mine. I don't want you taking your mood and your problems home to your families, because your spouses and your children don't deserve that. So you're going to leave it with me here on the bus. Every one of you, you're not getting off the bus until you drop your difficulties and your stresses in my hand. And this is what I'm going to do. My route ends right by the Hudson River. So when the route is over and all of you are done and all of you dropped off your problems in my hand, I'm going to go to the Hudson River and I'm going to throw them all into the river. The fellow had Tashlich in mind. He wasn't Jewish. But I'm reading this, I'm saying, he gets it. The woman who's writing this, who was on the bus, says it was as if the spell had been lifted. First, everyone burst out laughing. Well, there wasn't any laughter before. Now they're all laughing. And their faces gleam with like delight. Wow, this driver's a nice fellow. He broke the spell. He got through to them. And surprisingly enough, at the very next stop, the driver stood up, put his hand out, and says, no one's getting off the bus without dropping it off. The first guy did it. The second guy did it. And they all started doing it. Every adult on this bus dropped into the palm of this bus driver's hands. Some people laughed as they did it. Some teared up. But everyone did it. And he did the same ritual at every single stop until we all departed. And he dropped it off at the Hudson River. As we are all now living in a time of great stress and anguish over all of the events in Israel, we're all feeling it. We all get up at all hours of the night. We check our WhatsApp, we check our text messages, we check everything of what's going on in Israel. And when we see another soldier had fallen, it hurts. And another hostage has been found not alive, it hurts. And another family speaks out about what it's like for over 100 days not having their loved one. It hurts. We're all hurting. Let us reflect on what we can do to bring more love and more forgiveness and more compassion, and more decency, and more civility to each other, to those around us. We have to be kinder and more sensitive at a time like this, because that we can do. We can't change the weather. We can't change the traffic. But we can change our actions. None of us individually can bridge the divide in society. None of us can get the political parties to lower the temperature. None of us can end all wars or cure cancer. We can't do it. We definitely can't control the traffic or the weather, but like the bus driver, we have that degree of influence on everyone we brush up against, even those we never met before, might never meet again. So no matter who we are, where we are, or how tough our circumstances may seem, each of us can illuminate our own little corner of the world. In fact, it's the only way that we illuminate the world, one act of goodness and kindness at a time. Now to the war. Some of these themes I've touched upon in the past few months, but marking over 100 days, it's worth repeating. The war Israel is facing today is not about land. Any honest student of history knows that. There never was a Palestinian state. Know that. It's a myth. Not pre-1948. The fact that they renamed Israel Palestine did not make it a Palestinian homeland.
I thought Jordan was the homeland.
There wasn't pre-48, there wasn't pre-67, there wasn't pre-73, there wasn't in the 15th century, in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, or 21st. God gave the land of Israel to the children of Israel as an inheritance. That is the history. It belongs to each and every single Jew. Every believer of the Bible, Jew or non-Jew, knows this. Every honest historian knows that this was and is our homeland. Every archaeologist can back this up. We were exiled from this land for 2,000 years, but we never once stopped referring to it as our homeland. We never stopped praying for our land. We never stopped praying and longing for the return to our land. We never ceded an inch of ownership of our land. The Balfour Declaration, which is you're referring to, of 1917, declared the area that we know today as Israel and Jordan, this entire territory, if you looked at the map, to be divided into two states, one for Jews and one for Arabs. That's what the Balfour Declaration declared. A two-state solution, as you keep hearing the words, it was presented in 1917. The Arab state would be much larger than the Jewish state. All of what is today Jordan, then known as Transjordan, would be the Arab state. And the Jews would have Israel, its homeland. And the Arabs said no, because it was never about land. Let's fast forward to 2005, as we have spoken about before. Israel mistakenly disengages, called the disengagement plan, from the entire Gaza Strip. They did this in the hope and in the dream that somehow it would lead to peace. It physically dragged Jewish settlers out of their homes in Gush Katif, which was part of the Gaza. It left behind greenhouses that yielded amazing crops that were sold all over Israel and all over the world, because it's beautiful terrain there, with the false hopes that if we gave them these farms and these fields, then the Palestinians would develop something beautiful, something fruitful, something productive there for its people. And what did Israel get in return? I'm not talking just about 15 years later or 20 years later. I'm talking days later. Missiles, rockets, lobbied from the Gaza into the southern cities. That was the thank you. And the world said not a word. The world still pointed its finger at Israel. Somehow this was Israel's fault. Now imagine if Hamas took all the funds that they got since 2005, and they are in the billions. The energy, the materials, the resources that they have invested in acquiring and launching rockets of terror and building tunnels of death. The report last night came out that the estimate now is 350 miles of tunnels in a 26-mile area? How do you get to that number? It's not as if these people don't know how to build. And it's not as if they didn't have the money to build. You can't build 350 miles of tunnel underneath the ground without knowing how to build and without having the money to build. Now, take that same money from 2005. We can go to before that, but that's a separate discussion. Just from 2005, and invest it. Every Palestinian could have had a new condo. They could have built hospitals and schools, not fake hospitals and fake schools, which house missiles. They could have had a paradise. And they'll keep pointing the finger at Israel. It's so easy to do. Why not? Blame the Jew, blame the Jew. But my goodness, where are the people that really care about the Palestinian people? Why don't you stand up and speak and say what you squandered here, what opportunity you had to give something to your own people, to give your own children a chance at life? But no, you'd rather point the finger at Israel. You would rather have your people live in slums, live on the streets, be homeless, starve your own people so that you can take the money and build tunnels and get missiles so that you can kill yet another Jew. The enemy that attacked us on October the 7th, Hamas. The enemy in the north, Hezbollah. And the country behind it all, Iran. What is it that they want? Usually when there's a conventional war, the enemy has an objective. Usually it's about land, Putin wants Ukraine back. He wants the land. He wants the resources. You agree with it. You don't agree with it. You understand it. You understand what he wants. You understand why Ukraine is fighting back. They want independence. Most wars have something we can understand, and they're going to fight it out until one wins or one loses. There's power, there's money, there's resources. What is the objective of the enemies of Israel today? What do they want? They never made a secret of it. Maybe we just didn't believe them. They said it clearly, and they still say it clearly. They say it openly in their charter. This was never a conflict over land. It's the existence of Israel that they want surrendered. We don't have a right to exist in our homeland. It's the entire Jewish nation that they want exterminated. Make no mistake about it. What was done to 1,200 of our fellow Jews on October the 7th is what they and their supporters want done to each and every single one of us. If they could reach us, they would reach us. If they could decapitate each and every single one of us, they would do it. Indeed, as Jews, we abhor war. But when there is a sworn enemy who challenges your very right of existence, your right as a human being to simply live, then war against this enemy is an act of peace. Then war against this enemy is an act of compassion. Then war against this enemy is an act of preserving life. Every fair-minded, sane, civilized person understands that when your home is attacked, when your home is violated, when your children are kidnapped, you have an obligation to fight. An obligation to fight. Everyone understands that the most basic and fundamental rule of nationhood is that when your borders are breached and your cities are bombed and your citizens are killed, you better mount a defense if you want to remain a nation. How much more so when we saw and we witnessed the atrocities of October the 7th, of Simchas Torah, over 100 days ago. Atrocities that go beyond anything that Israel has ever seen before, and thus the only reference to such evil is the Holocaust. You all know what happened. You all know the numbers. 1,200 murdered on October 7th. 300 of them were soldiers. Thousands were wounded. 230 were taken hostage. 130 still remain hostage today in the most brutal and torturous of manners. And even those numbers, they don't tell us the full scope of the evil, the full scope of what this war is all about. We are children of the Holocaust survivors. We're the next generation. And we grew up with this. This was part of our psyche growing up. We often ask questions, whether we asked it openly, or we spoke about it, or we just held it within. Tell me you haven't watched a Holocaust film, a Holocaust movie, whether a documentary or a Hollywood one, and that at some point in the film said, God, how did you let this happen? We're constantly struggling with the question. We always will. Until the Messiah comes or we make our way to heaven, hopefully the Messiah first, we will always grapple with that question. You will never have a satisfactory answer because there is no satisfactory answer. But there's another question that I often found myself asking, and perhaps you yourselves as well. I know the question, where was the world? That I've already understood, that the world just didn't care. But where were the Jews in America at that time, and what were they doing? That's a hard question to ask. It's a painful question to ask. As a son of a Holocaust survivor, I often wondered, were there demonstrations in the streets? Did life just go on? Did anyone picket at the White House? What was happening in America? I don't have the answers. I don't know. I've heard the answer that there was no social media. They didn't know. The news weren't reporting it. But some knew. Did they keep it quiet? Did they not want to upset the administration? Did they just trust the administration? Did they feel that we're just guests here in this country and we have to just be quiet? All these are possible answers. But as children of this generation, what we did to deal with this, and perhaps with the guilt, was we took a sacred vow. We all did. Whether we publicly stated so or we just emotionally stated so. We took a sacred vow. Our generation vowed to the generation of the Holocaust, and we said, never again. That was our vow to them. That was our promise. Never again will we allow Jewish babies to be grabbed from their parents and slaughtered. We vowed never again. Never again will we allow the raping of our daughters. Never again will we allow our elders to be beaten to death. Never again will we allow the stealing of our children, of our brothers and our sisters, of our fathers and our mothers and our bubbies and our zaydis. Never again will we allow the murder of innocents for the only crime of being a Jew. Never again. Never again is now. It's now. These evil, genocidal, jihadist Nazis, these savages, they raped our sisters and our daughters and then paraded them through the streets of Gaza for public taunting and beating. We must say never again and mean it. In their sickness, in their depravity, they videotape with their GoPros these atrocities to show it off. If they're cutting off the head of one of our brothers and sisters, they would take their own cell phone of this person. They would videotape what they just did, and then they would use WhatsApp to send out the video to all of their contacts to show their friend without a head. That's how evil this was. Never again is now. This is our moment to correct history. This is our moment to answer the call. Will we remain silent or will we act? The difference today is that during the Holocaust, we didn't have Eretz Yisrael with an army, with tanks, with machine guns. Today we have a response team. Literally the day after, 400,000 reserves showed up. We have proud Maccabees today willing to fight, to put their lives on the line, to say never again. We have the most sophisticated weapons in the world. We have sophisticated missiles. We have iron domes. We have tanks that the world hasn't seen yet. We have machine guns. We have the ability to fight. And we have the people to carry out the fight that have the will and desire. But the world will scream and the world will yell and the world will condemn, and that's where we come in. Stand up for Israel. Stand strong for Israel. Protest for Israel. Rally for Israel. Pray for Israel. Do a mitzvah for Israel. Every one of us can do something, or all. The Lubavitcher Rebbe urged us by the 6-Day War, by the Yom Kippur War, by any time Israel was in crisis, and he told every Jew on the face of the earth, you want to do something spiritual for the soldiers that are on the battlefield. Keep them in mind. You put on tefillin that day, keep in mind you're doing it for the soldier. Give them that extra protection. You're going to light a Shabbos candle, keep in mind there's some female soldier somewhere putting her life on the line. Light the candle for her. When I visited the army bases and we told them what's happening in America, the Jews are lining up to put on tefillin. The Jews are putting mezuzahs on the doors, not taking them off. It filled them with so much courage. We have to continue doing this. That the world will scream, what else is new? That the UN will condemn us again and again and again, what else is new? That there will be people in the State Department that will say 100 days is enough time for a ceasefire. No, ceasefire means victory for Hamas. We all know that. If there's a ceasefire today, Hamas is having a parade tomorrow in the streets of Gaza declaring victory.
Right.
So we understand what's at stake. Our vow of never again means we have to stand up and be the spokespeople for the soldiers on the front line that are putting their lives on the line every single minute of every single day since this began on October the 7th. I found it shocking that South Africa, of all countries, has taken Israel to the World Court for genocide. Right. We know the responses to that. We don't have to get into that. Over the past 100 days, we Jews have been experiencing what I call emotional whiplash. On one hand, we've been exposed to cruelty and barbarism and cynicism and hate on the scale we haven't seen since the Holocaust. But on the other hand, we've seen these tremendous expressions of love, of warmth, of unity, of solidarity, of courage, of bravery, and Jewish pride, the likes of which we haven't experienced in our lifetime. You saw it at that rally in Washington, D.C. when 300,000 people came together. You see it in the small community rallies. You see it everywhere. You feel it. You feel it when you talk to any Jew. We have to remember, as we started with, Biyachad Ninatzech, if we stand firmly together, if we stand united, if we have Israel's back, we will be victorious. It may take time. It may take weeks. It may take months. It may take years. But we will be victorious so long as we stay together. We have to remember 3 magic words. And we say it every single day. Am Yisrael Chai. And what does that mean? I'll close with a very simple question. It's a simple question for each and every single one of us to ponder as we go through these difficult days. What does Israel mean to you? Is it A or B? Is it A concession given to you by the world out of compassion or sympathy because of the Holocaust?
No.
Or is it B, a gift that God gave to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob, and to each and every single one of us? If it's A, if it's simply that the world allows us to be there, then the world dictates to us where we can be, when we can be, how we can be, and we have to jump. If a Secretary of State says jump this high, we jump. If the UN says do this, we have to do it because it's a gift from the world to a sympathetic, they have Rahmanis on us because we lost 6 million and therefore they're allowing us to live in this part of the world, but you got to follow our conditions. If that's our psyche, then we have no choice but to listen and cease fire today. But if we truly believe this is our homeland, and it's been our homeland for thousands of years. And yes, we're thankful to President Truman and we're thankful to the United Nations in 1948 for recognizing it with all the gratitude in the world. But you didn't give us this land. God gave us this land and it will remain our land forever and forever. That's what Am Yisrael Chai means. Then indeed, we will be victorious. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions. Yeah. We'll let the Zoom people off the hook and we'll take some questions in here.